else coming in here?
Come on
Hi there.
in, Dana.
Hi, Dana. I'm Steve.
Hi.
So what we're going to talk today about is fermentation. It's kind of, I've found most people are curious by it, maybe a little off put by it, don't quite understand exactly what it is, and given kind of today's modern, like industrialized food culture, just are a little afraid of it. So we're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about it right now. Fermenting. Can y'all see this? Is it the same as canning? How about pickling? What do you guys think?
Yeah.
Depends on the spice.
Some pickling.
Yeah.
Some pickling is just dumping it in vinegar.
Yeah, well, exactly. And so there are some distinctions. Canning, it certainly is not. And pickling, it's kind of in the Venn diagram, there's a little bit of overlap there. You can both can pickle using vinegar, or you can ferment the way that I'm going to show you how to today, which does not. It's not the same. So can you guys see this? Okay. So a big thing is no vinegars added during fermentation. A lot of people think that sauerkraut gets its sour flavor from adding vinegars, and while it certainly can, and in industrial production, that is done in a lot of cases. However, traditionally, it's not done that way. It is actually just the acid produced by lactic acid bacteria that create all the beautiful, wonderful, complex flavor. No cooking is required. It seems counterintuitive, but you put it there and you leave it there for days, sometimes weeks, depending on what you're doing, sometimes months, depending on what you're fermenting, but we're not going there today. So it's really easy and relatively hands-off once you get it started. There's actually a very low risk of botulism. So does everyone know what botulism is? So botulism is caused by, there's a bacteria called C. botulinum, Clostridium, I think. Botulinum, and it produces a neurotoxin.
Does everyone know about
that that basically paralyzes you, but it paralyzes all the things, and so it'll stop your breathing, it'll stop your heart from functioning. But this is not about a horror story like that. The great thing is, even though botulism exists around us everywhere, it is not activated generally by fermenting vegetables, and in fact, there are no known cases of food poisoning when vegetable fermentation is done properly. So yes to that, it's relatively safe. The thing about botulism that has come up in home canning is that you raise the temperature, right? And raising the temperature is meant to kill bacteria, both good and bad. However, it doesn't get high enough or long enough to kill C. botulinum. And so what it does is it actually activates it. And now it's sitting in this environment with no oxygen, which it loves, and no light, which it loves. It's sitting in a can and just multiplies and spreads. And so that's why canning is a significantly higher risk, particularly home canning. There are commercial canning, they do what's called pressure canning, which is why a lot of canned vegetables are very, very mushy, because it has to be cooked for a very high pressure, very long time for it to be pasteurized effectively. So enough of the horror stories. What is fermenting? So there are lots of fermented foods. There are lots and lots and lots of fermented foods. There are olives, cheese, coffee. Cocoa is actually fermented. Let's see, salami is fermented. Kefir, kombucha, I'm sure you guys have heard of those kinds of things. Tempeh is fermented soybeans in a clump. There are just so many different things, and it's existed it's existed naturally for who knows how long, but it's existed culturally as a controlled mechanism for a very long time. So let's talk. It's safe and delicious. The great thing is, or safer and delicious. So the great thing is, the bacteria, the lactic acid bacteria that are produced during fermentation actually crowd out and destroy, when it's done properly, destroy the foodborne illness producing bacteria. So botulism, it's actually weaker than the acidophilus bacteria in there. They multiply, they love the salt, they're into it, they crowd it out. The key is to get fermentation going quickly because the neurotoxin that botulism produces, if it's there, which it very likely isn't, does not go away, which is why you can have something that's totally sanitary and still get botulism from it. It's a neurotoxin that's produced. Regardless, you don't need to worry about that here because there are no known cases of food poisoning when it's done properly. It's been around a very, very, very long time. So controlled fermentation goes back to 7000 BC, where we first started fermenting honey into wine. And from then, we started using it for all different kinds of things, food preservation. It eventually got into vegetables. We're not going to talk about making wine here because that's not phase one appropriate, but it's actually produced by yeast. So we're talking about bacteria here. Yeast actually produce alcohol from the sugars that are in vegetables or other things. It occurs spontaneously in nature. So I have a fun little video for you here. Start playing. No. Why isn't it playing?
It's always playing.
What's that? So what you're looking at here, what would have happened here, this is a video of drunk animals. So they're stumbling around, they are having a gay old time because there is a fruit in Africa, it's called maruca, it drops onto the ground and spontaneously ferments there. And it's also really tasty, and so animals from all over the place, there are elephants on here, there are monkeys on here, gosh, I wish this video played, that they just like it. They get drunk, it's tasty, it's fun, they stumble around, they have a party, and then it's over. But that's just to say that it really does occur everywhere. It occurs in all the places. Are there any health benefits? Well, I'm glad you asked. Did someone say probiotics? What we've been talking about this whole time are probiotics. They are the engine that drives fermentation. So probiotics, of course, are bacteria. You know that pill you take? Some may take to give you acidophilus, to give you probiotics in your belly. That's actually in there. You can get it just from eating this, and it tastes tastier than a pill. The cool thing about this is that nutrients are unlocked and created. So because bacteria are partially digesting the veggies, it actually makes it easier for you to absorb the nutrients. And they produce nutrients themselves. So they produce B vitamins and vitamin K in your belly, just on their own, spontaneously. So that's a really cool thing. Better absorption of nutrients, they release enzymes that, of course, help you digest and break down your food even further. And then the sugars and starches are reduced. So they love sugars and starches. That is their fuel. That drives the engine of the bacteria. And so sugars and starches are reduced, IP friendly, love it. If you look on the label of fermented foods, they are not allowed to say what the content of your carbohydrates are after it's been fermented because it's a variable process. So it's just difficult to gauge that. So whenever you look at like a fresh fermented food and like the refrigerated islet Whole Foods, it is the calorie content, the nutrient content going in. But you can be sure that it is not the same when you eat it. So yay to that. Just be happy that you're consuming less carbs if you eat this than you would have had you eaten it whole or fresh. But wait, there's more. Immune health and better mood. So a ton of our immune system is in our gut, a ton of it. And the acidophilus bacteria help with the mucus lining of your stomach, which helps prevent bad microbes from sticking to your tummy. And so they slide off, not to mention they kind of crowd it out too. If you're constantly getting fresh, good probiotics in you, they crowd out the bad things and you pass it. most colds and flus, I learned this way back in sanitary kitchen school, they're actually foodborne. You're ingesting a thing and you get sick from it. Don't freak out. This can help actually prevent that, which is really, really lovely. When you think better mood, have you guys ever heard the phrase, trust your gut? That was a stupid question. You know the phrase, trust your gut? Yeah. Well, it turns out that's a real thing. Have you ever seen something or done something and you're like, you feel it right here, right? Your nervous system is actually linked here. So there's a special set of nerves that goes down here. So that feeling is actually real. It's not psychosomatic. It's an actual thing. The bacteria, these guys, produce serotonin. Most of your serotonin is produced in your belly. And if you know, serotonin is one of the, I wouldn't call it the happy neurotransmitter, but it is the everything's okay neurotransmitter, generally used to reduce anxiety and things like that. So this can actually up the serotonin in your body as well. Preserved food, of course, lasts longer. It's one of the original reasons that we started fermenting. I swear we're going to get into the actual stuff. I just wanted to, give you this. It lasts longer, and it is very budget friendly. This costs $1.88 for one head of cabbage. You add some salt, you put it in a jar, you let it sit for a while, and you have a tasty thing that can last for weeks. I call that a good deal because that cabbage won't last for weeks on my counter. Did I mention? It's delicious. If you're into that. So what do you need to start fermenting? There are 4 main things that you need to start fermenting. Veggies. In this context, you can ferment other things, but you need veggies. I prefer organic veggies, not necessarily because they don't use pesticides, although that's a great benefit. Organic veggies are not irradiated. So irradiation is effectively pasteurization of the vegetable, and it kills the good and the bad bacteria. But you want the good bacteria. You want the good guys that are on this so you can make your sauerkraut tasty and quickly. So I prefer organic. You can use conventional, but it may take longer for your ferment to ferment. Interesting. I can't
Can
find.
you use a starter from another fermentation?
You certainly can. I would prefer to use a starter from a fermentation I started naturally, because that way it's the bacteria that's kind of around. It's a whole colony, and it will last longer from batch to batch. Generally, if you're going, say, 2, 3, 4 batches, it may start to die out and your ferments may be slower, or maybe the flavor may end up souring, or it could make your veggies more mushy. I can't find organic pickling cucumbers anywhere. My pickles pickle slowly because I can get the little Persian guys that fit in one of these jars, but they're conventional and they take forever. But it's worth it. When it actually happens, totally worth it. Salt.
How do you know when it happens?
How do you know when it happens?
Yeah, that's my question.
We're gonna get to that. We're gonna get to that part.
You'll get to see it.
So
You have to burn it like a baby.
Formally cited.
yeah. So you need salt. Salt is a very, very important process. A, because it inhibits bacterial growth. So if there is any bad stuff on there, it'll slow it down, and it also slows down your ferment. It controls the length of time that it's actually going, and it keeps your veggies crisper. Interestingly enough. If you are not allowed to have a lot of salt, I would recommend using very little salt rather than no salt, because no salt ferments can tend to be, they happen really quickly, which is sometimes nice, but the veggies tend to be a little mushier. So just keep that in mind. Yeah.
Does it matter what kind of salt?
Oh, you were reading my mind. So I prefer sea salt, any like colored salt. So like pink Himalayan salt, regular sea salt, black salt, all those things have extra minerals in them that the bacteria do love. So any of that kind of stuff is always good. If you're in a pinch, use kosher. It's totally fine. I've done kosher before and it's been A-okay. There are pickling salts, which are, I think, a little finer grain. You can use those too. That's perfectly fine. But my inner hippie prefers the sea salt, and it's okay. non-reactive vessel. So stainless steel kills bacteria. That's why they use it in hospitals. It doesn't allow the breeding of that kind of stuff. And so you want to stay away from containers that are metal, but you can use so many other kinds. You can use glass, you can use clay, you can use terracotta, which I suppose is clayish. You can use porcelain, you can use, gosh, what are the other kinds? What's that? Wood, sauerkraut, wine, produced in wood barrels. So you can use so many other substrates, like it's metal, don't even worry about it. Not to mention metal can rust, and the acid in the that ends up getting produced can corrode your metal.
How about enamel coated metal or Teflon coated metal?
So I'm not a huge fan of the plastic. So the Teflon metal, I wouldn't, because cuts can happen and then bad bacteria can grow in there. But enamel coated metal, I don't see much of a problem with, as long as there are no nicks in it, as long as there are no chips in it. Yeah. Which is another reason I don't recommend like plastic bowls either. You can use them maybe once or twice, but after that, they start to get broken down by the acid, and they don't. It's just not. It's not good. And then of course patience. My cousin patience. It can take 3 days. It can take 4 weeks. It can take however long you want it to take, based on a number of factors. So salt can slow down your ferment, but that can be a good thing if you like your ferment a little saltier. Temperature can play a big part. So the cooler the temperature, the slower the fermentation. They love 70 to 74 degrees. That's like the spot. But if you can't do that, like I've been fermenting in the winter, it just takes a little longer for it to happen. Generally, you don't want to go below like 66 if you can't. But again, you don't have to. The stuff lives, and it even lives in the fridge once it's where you want it to go. You put it in there, it'll keep fermenting just much slower. And yeah, and those are the four things. It's really, 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 really simple. Age old. It's demo time.
Yay.
I didn't know if someone wanted to be. Does anyone want to come up and help, or just watch? That's totally fine.
Jana loves to
Perfectly
help.
Well, yes. Okay.
We got some aprons around
Thank
the
you.
corner.
Or do I not need to wash them?
You should wash your hands. Yeah. I always use gloves because when you're dealing with a lot of salts and you don't know if you have a cut on your hand, that's one sure way to find out. Yes.
Can you add other flavors?
You can add so many other flavors, and we're going to talk about that too.
Okay.
Yes. Yes, yes, yes. And you should add so many other flavors. In fact,
Are there some flavoring ingredients that hurt the bacteria?
so certain things, if they're antimicrobial, can slow it. Generally, they don't hurt it.
Okay, I was thinking cloves or other things that are used as antibacterials, peppers.
So cloves are actually a part of pickling spice. So you can add it, just don't add too much. But yeah, cloves and even garlic can be inhibitory for that kind of stuff. But life finds a way.
Do you have cloves in one of those, don't you?
I have cloves in the pickles in there, but the pickles aren't ready. Okay. So somewhere on here it talks about herbs and spices. Use whatever you like. If you like the flavor, toss it in there. Try it. And again, because it's cheap, if you end up not liking the flavor, throw it out. Start over. It's totally fine. And you know what? If you toss it in your yard, your flowers will love it.
With garlic?
Yeah, I'm gonna wear one of these.
Just like if you don't like your sauerkraut, use it as compost.
Especially sometimes the flavor.
Compost
It
is
depends on how much salt is in it.
yeah, true. But yeah, compost is already a fermenting process as it is, and so this just kind of adds to it. It kind of breaks it down. Lovely and everything. Yes, I love it.
Thing I was from.
Oh my goodness, you know what I forgot? A bowl.
Oh no.
We were talking about all the
I
things.
think we're down in the drawers.
Down here.
No?
this casserole dish down here.
Yeah, there's this white casserole dish.
Yeah.
Oh, is there? Okay, we'll do that.
No.
Because all we need is to, you know what? This should be fine.
Perfect.
I'm gonna rinse it out.
Smile, Dana.
You're on camera, you're famous.
Can you ferment fruit? Oh no, that turns into alcohol.
Yeah.
My grandmother
I'm
used to-
sorry.
My grandmother used to take a ceramic crock pot and she'd put canned fruit cocktail in it.
So
And
Steve,
there was a little bit
turn the
of
bowl, there's a,
beer yeast down there, and she would let that ferment.
let me get a
And it
picture
was like,
of you
know,
guys.
It wasn't really high potency wine or anything.
Yeah.
But you take a scoop of that and it's got that carbonation,
Oh,
and
okay.
that bite, and just a little bit of alcohol
Uh-huh.
and all that sugar. It's really
Good.
good.
Country wine.
That's true.
Love it. Love it.
Well, this was fruit cocktail. So
Yeah,
it's still
that's so good.
Yeah.
So much sugar. The yeast
Yeah.
loves that. That's a good idea. Not on phase one. All right. So I usually like to remove the outer of this. So there's a guy, they call him the godfather of fermenting, although, I mean, I would think he'd be older. His name is Sander Katz. And he goes around the world preaching the gospel of fermenting. He knows so many things. He calls himself a generalist, but I think he knows too much about fermenting to say that. I can take this.
That was good on this side.
He has a book called Wild Fermentation and another one called The Art of Fermentation. And they have tons and tons of recipes and tons of history and science behind it too. I bring him up because he does not like to wash his veggies.
I was
Because
just gonna say, they're pretty dirty.
Yeah. he does not like to wash his veggies because you're washing the bacteria off. And if you're buying organic, you know you're generally going to be pretty good. Although this,
Yeah,
definitely.
I was gonna say, I see straight up dirt.
That's no way. No. If you see straight up dirt, wash it for real. But like most of the stuff in here, the dirt's not going to get inside of the head. And so pulling off the outer leaves, we'll get rid of that. And then keeping this intact will not hurt anything. Let's put this here. Put off the base there. I like to do this by hand, but you can always use a food processor. You can just
Can you name some other vegetables that you have fermented?
Yes. So I have fermented, back in the day, I fermented beets. I've fermented cauliflower. Cabbage is always a lovely, wonderful ferment. Kale. Kale can get a little bitter, but that's still okay. Like if you like the flavor, do whatever. There's a whole culture in North Carolina. They call it collard kraut. And it's bitter. And some people find it incredibly off-putting, but it's popular, and ultimately it's just your taste. You know what
I will eat it. The rest of it. That's the core.
And so,
It's just cauliflower.
yeah, it's just cabbage.
Cabbage and cauliflower are the same thing.
Yeah, they're all cruciferous vegetables. Kale and broccoli in the same family as well. So I usually just chop it like this. Can you all see? Feel free to gather around if you want. Okay. And just
So what is not recommended to ferment?
not recommended to ferment. Jicama. It breaks down too quickly.
Okay.
Yeah. Oranges. I mean, it's not like we would do that here, but soft fruits. You can ferment them into booze, but you can't ferment them into tasty, savory things. So that's just one
Can
thing.
you ferment multiple vegetables at the same time?
Oh, those are the best. Yes. Kimchi is an example of multiple vegetables at the same time. So that is carrots, green onions, garlic, chili paste, Napa cabbage, love, joy. It has all the good stuff in it. And in Korea, there are hundreds of recipes for kimchi.
Don't they do it underground?
Everyone swears by it. It used to be done for like 6 months underground in clay pots. I think they've switched to, they now have kimchi refrigerators. Yeah. Which is actually kind of nice because then it doesn't stink up the rest of your fridge.
I was gonna ask if fermenting smells.
So it does, and I'm going to open one of these guys.
You about to smell.
Well, I'm sorry, I forgot your name.
Dana.
Dana? I was going to say Dawn, I'm sorry.
A D.
But so I'm going to open up one of these guys while Dana chops this cabbage here. And actually, shoot. Might as well. I mean, do you want to taste?
Yeah.
This purple cabbage is super tasty. You don't have to if you don't want.
Yeah, I'll take.
You'll taste it? Yeah. Okay.
Can you rinse it before you?
I'll bring it
eat
around so you can smell it. Yeah. Yeah, it's not bad.
It's not.
Yeah.
What
Oh, it's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It
it's
isn't
fine.
terrible. This one just has garlic and brown mustard seeds in it.
There I have it.
And this is mild. This is not a.
And so we put jalapenos in this one, the cauliflower. So it's a little
Okay.
spicy.
Yeah.
Pork. I like to share those right now. Maybe we should. I mean, you could put on some gloves and just like,
Yeah.
Yeah. I just opened up a box if you want to taste.
Yeah.
Oh,
They
taste.
So Steve, there's plates and forks and knives in the top left, all the
Oh,
way to the
there are?
left.
Oh, look at this! Wait,
oh, this is great.
we have forks, and we have sample cups. Look at you! You're prepared so much.
What do you put these things on, or do you just eat it as a snack?
So you can use it as a condiment. I find the sauerkraut goes really well on like sausage or grilled meats. Super good with those. Kimchi is generally eaten as a side. You can just eat it whenever. I drink pickle juice because it's really, really tasty when it's home fermented.
That's good on the salad.
Ooh.
Yeah, so
It's a
like,
vinegar.
yeah, we stopped
Okay.
doing dressing, so we
Yeah.
just use some of the fermenting juice like in the salad and then like
Great for
the
salad.
cauliflower
Oh.
on top, like it's really good.
And soups, you can eat it just like that. You can also, you can toss it in a soup. You can cook it. You don't have to. You're doing an awesome job.
Just finish the piece you got.
So I just like mid-stop?
You're totally right. Yeah, you might as well.
And the salt
I brought bags.
keeps it crunchy. You've done it without salt. Yeah, it does get a little mushy.
So you start with a big old pile of cabbage here. And then add salt. Generally for this much, I'd probably add 2 tablespoons of salt, maybe a little bit less. But luckily it's to taste. So here comes the fun part. Some people add brine. This is called self-brining, the method that we're using here. There's so much liquid, there's so much water in cabbage that it really doesn't need to have any water added. So what we'll do is we'll add a tablespoon to this part, squeeze it up. So you just have to have it there like that, and then you start to work it in. And you squeeze it. You just start squeezing more than you think you might need, and you honestly wouldn't think it happens, but this is going to be so juicy so shortly.
And you just let it sit too, or?
You can let it sit, and in fact, for kimchi, a lot of the time you salt the leaves and then you let them sit, and the salt draws out the water. Napa cabbage is a little more delicate than this cabbage, so sometimes this needs a little abuse, but you don't have to. Or you can add a little brine, which is generally like 2.5 tablespoons of salt to 4 cups of water. So you don't even have to crush these things. You could toss these in a jar and then cover them with brine that way.
But you use a distilled water, right?
I prefer distilled water because a lot of municipal water has like chlorine or chloramine. Chlorine can evaporate, so if you leave the water out, the chlorine will go away. But chloramine is a different kind of, I don't know, antiseptic, but it's a different kind of microbe killer that does not go away with air. And so I just prefer distilled water, or even better, just like spring water from a bottle. Yeah, and it gets even more. See that juice coming up
Oh
there?
my God.
Yeah. I know, it seems weird, but this is the brine. And so what this ends up doing is you put it in there, you're getting rid of all the air, and what's filling up those pockets of air is the juice from the cabbage, and that helps the bacteria grow. So I'm gonna do this for just, would you mind opening this bottle for me? Thank you. Thank you. Oh, goodness.
How do you know
Happy
you're?
in here.
I know, I'm so sorry, I'm not used to having a banana. All right, so.
You have data.
I have a data. So, and then you can toss it in here. I may not have gotten out all of the juice, but because of the salt, it's gonna end up coming out anyway.
Where do you buy one of those things?
One of these things,
Yeah.
you get this at, where do we get ours?
Amazon.
Amazon,
Yeah.
the internet, the future's awesome.
I think it's on the Target though too.
Okay.
Little mason jar.
What do you call it? Oh, mason jar filler?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a canning funnel.
A canning.
Oh.
Yeah. So you put that in there, and you can see, I like this little tool. This they call a pickle packer. You can get it at masontops.com.
Use a muddle.
It's not super, it's essentially that, yeah. You can use a muddle, you can use your fist if you can fit it in there. You can use any kind of hard thing.
And I've got small fists.
And then you just pack it down. So you see the juice kind of coming up over there? Essentially, you just want to submerge it all in there.
Otherwise it goes.
Otherwise, it goes moldy. Exactly. Everything exposed to air gets moldy. So you may have stuff on the top that does get a touch moldy. You can actually just pull that off as long as it's not colored. You can pull it off and throw that out, and the rest of your ferment is fine because it's been submerged and not exposed to air. Still skeeves me out. Luckily, I haven't had to deal with mold yet, but
You have more gadgets too to deal with that.
I have so much gadget. Yes, and there are other gadgets on the internet that I'll show you here. And so, do you want to do the next?
Yeah.
Yes. And you know what? Let's add a little something to it. All right. So maybe just a tablespoon of salt.
But it's not really that much salt, huh?
It's really not that much salt, but it is enough to.
The salt is kind of gray.
It is because it's great sea salt.
There we go.
It comes from the gray sea.
It comes from the Great Sea. Which sea does this come from? This is Celtic sea salt. I'm going to assume, hopefully,
Strong hands.
Irish Sea.
The Irish Sea.
the Irish Sea.
Same place carrageenan comes from.
Yes. All right.
Have any aggression?
Yes, you can get it out there. Again, if you don't have the time or you don't want to squeeze, you can always add a brine. Again, that's like 2 to 3 tablespoons of salt to 4 cups of water, and you can put that in there. It won't be as dense. The great thing about this is you can just pack it all in there and you can get a ton in one single shot. So you squeeze, you do your thing, and it's good. And we didn't do this for the bottom portion of it, but I have some rainbow peppercorns here. I like these because pink peppercorn is a little like lemony. White peppercorn is kind of, it's hard to describe. It's funky, but it's super good. It's really great with poultry. I think that's awesome in there. And bay leaf is a staple of pickling, so you always want to add that in there. Just add a little umami. Yeah.
If you add just dill, will it remind you of a dill pickled cabbage?
You can certainly do that.
And then the pickles we have.
Oh yeah, here, let me show you my unready pickles. So, another thing you'll notice, when you pickle, it gets cloudy. That's natural, that's normal, don't freak out. I freaked out the first time. I was like, what am I doing wrong? But it turns out it's just a natural process of the bacteria getting in there and doing what they're supposed to do. Not to mention it's drawing out like pectins and other things from the cucumber itself. So you can see here, I just put a whole frond of dill in there. Just straight up. I put some cloves. Yeah,
You also put a tea bag in that. Why?
I did. Oh. So cucumbers get soggy fast. Tannins help prevent the sogginess from happening. So there are a number of different ways you can do this. You could do a grape leaf, which is the preferred method because it doesn't caffeinate your pickle.
Anybody want grape leaves? Or have some?
But that's the thing. Like they're
They
hard
grow
to
with grapes,
find.
so. in case you want some. There you go.
And so
I'm good, by the way.
I think you're good. Pick it up and squeeze it. Let's see.
Oh.
Check that out. Yes.
Done.
Check that out. So do you want to add some of that?
Do you want to add it for me? 'Cause my hands
I will so add some of that. So
So do you add like just a regular Lipton tea bag, or if you added a flavored tea bag, would that add some flavor to your pickle?
it would add some flavor. You may not necessarily want that flavor in there. I just did organic green tea, plain, nothing else added to make sure that there was nothing else added. And we'll see. It's a little slow. They're conventional cucumbers, so it's a little bit slower. But yeah, that just helps keep the cells from breaking down so much.
There's a lot of oak trees around here, but the oak leaves have lots of tannins.
Oh yeah, you could probably use oak leaf. Let's do a little of that.
Especially canned bark.
Canned bark.
Yeah, you might as well mix that around.
Bark
You know what? We're gonna add
Yeah.
some garlic. I'm gonna add some garlic here too, because garlic.
Did you do anything? Did you take off the bottom?
You don't even need to. Just toss it in there.
Make note of that.
You can, like if you want to specifically ferment garlic, you can make it pretty. But in this instance, you can just toss it in there whole. Fermentation does an interesting thing to garlic sometimes. Sometimes it'll turn it blue-green. That's normal. It's because it's the acids reacting with the sulfur in the garlic itself. Totally fine. It's not harmful. Just I freaked out, and so I went to Google.
You want all the juice and stuff, right?
Yeah, just toss it all in there, all that juicy goodness. Check it out. Look at that. Okay. Do you want a pack?
Yeah.
You see all that juice? We added no extra water. That is literally from the cabbage itself. So another great thing, another great reason for eating cabbage in general, you're getting a lot of water, but that is also, gosh, you're so good. Okay. You did a thing. That is awesome. There are a number of ways to keep your cabbage submerged.
What hockey puck is that?
A hockey puck, actually, they make little like glass hockey pucks to do that. I use a little spring. This is made of non-degradable, non-coated metal that surprisingly does not actually seem to inhibit fermentation. But put that down in there. And that,
Bailey?
You got it on the internet as well.
I got that on the internet as well. You know what? If you go to masontops.com, they have all the things you need.
Mason pots.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
Um,
Sounds like somebody's name. Mason.
right? I think they're talking in terms of like mason jars.
Yeah.
So yeah, add a bay leaf or two, add some fennel. What's the weirdest thing I've added? I don't even know.
Horseradish.
I can't remember. Horseradish is super good. And so then you can do that. Generally, you could fill it. We could fill it higher. We don't have to necessarily. For this, you can squeeze that bad boy on there. Good job. Yeah, the gloves get a little slippery.
So you need to leave it sealed?
There you go. And then you want to leave it sealed for a day or two. You want to feel how the top is because when bacteria eat, just like when we eat cabbage, they produce gas. And so and so it produces a lot of CO2, it produces a lot of carbon dioxide. So you definitely want to burp this. And burping just means you can make those noises or not, they're optional. You just want to release it until you hear it go, and then you can put this back on.
And you'll actually see bubbles come up.
Yeah.
Like when you open it, and if you don't burp it every day, like he was out and I had to take care of his children. And so I forgot to burp it for 2 days. And so I opened that cauliflower one and it was like,
Yeah.
I was like, oh no, what's happening?
That's normal. But yeah, if you release the pressure more often, then you won't have. It's like opening a can of soda that's been shaken. You're just releasing the pressure a little more often. So do that 3 to 4 days between 66 and 74 degrees. Again, you can just leave it out on your counter. Some people prefer to cover it. Some people don't. I haven't noticed much of a difference, but I do put it in a cabinet just because it's out of the way. And
Have you ever used a fermentation tube like they do for wines and stuff?
the little,
It's just a tube that goes out into a cup of water and it bubbles into the water and
Yeah.
no air can get back in.
so they have little airlock type things. In fact, this is a modification of that. So this is just a little silicone piece on the top of a vent so nothing gets in and it allows it to self-burn. Also MasonTuffs.com, I think? Possibly not. I found it on the internet though. But yeah, they have those and then they have other ones that are, there's a little tube that goes and then there's a water reservoir, kind of like, I think of it like plumbing under your sink. And then there's a water reservoir there and the gas can get out and then nothing can get back in. So it helps prevent mold or any of that kind of stuff.
Pasteur invented that.
Pasteur also figured out fermentation in 1856. Yeah, it was the dude who in all of his experimentation said, oh, wait a second, there's correlation here. We got to find this out. His was initially with yeast, but turns out it works. Fermentation works, with bacteria and with mold. Even. So.
Will it get more liquid?
Yes. So this will produce more liquid. You did a pretty good squeeze, so more may not come out. I don't know, but it's always worth a check to see. And if you do want to add more liquid, you can add a little bit more brine. I love the juice. Like I said, I drink pickle juice. Not like.
Oh, is that why there's so much juice in that jar?
In this one?
Yeah.
But this one's just because I ran out of cucumbers. I only had a small batch, and I was like, I might as well just fill it
All
up.
right.
You still want to cover them.
Yeah, exactly. You still want to cover them. And then I ran out of springs, so they're floating at the top.
But for the
Oh, okay. I was wondering.
yeah, for the cauliflower and the pickles, you have to put water because they don't produce any juice when you're squeezing it like the crab.
Yeah,
does.
you don't want to
So
squeeze your
have to
cauliflower. You
use
kind of want them to
a
remain
brine.
intact. So these two are brined, and they use the 4 cups to 2 tablespoons of salt ratio. And you have some sauerkraut.
Really?
Yeah.
Sweet.
Oh, nice.
I
Just
love
burp it.
Yeah, just burp it. So yeah, just keep checking it. If this doesn't give like it does now, just release the gas a little bit. 3 or 4 days, give it a taste. If it just tastes like salty cabbage, it could go longer.
It's
And
only 3 or 4 days?
it can be as early as 3 or 4 days, yeah. It's cooler weather right now, so it may take a little bit longer. These guys, I did these 2 weeks ago, and they're still not super acidic. So it just,
We just put those in the refrigerator today. It's basically until it tastes like the kind of funk you want.
yeah. Some people love it super funky, and some people love it super acidic. I tend to like it really acidic, but some people like it mild.
So the longer it goes, the more.
Acid it produces, the more lactic acid it produces.
And we used to make yogurt by putting the jars on top of the fridge.
Yeah.
So it's nice and warm. The fridge generates heat,
Mm-hmm.
and so it's warmer.
would that be a good
and-
place
And
for
it doesn't take as long.
Yeah.
It could be.
Yes.
Shoot, do it. Yeah, it's worth a shot. I haven't done it, but I think it's tried and tested.
So, what's the
the difference between fermenting and pickling? Like
So
you're making pickles, right?
the Venn diagram. So pickling is generally just an acid brine type thing with a vegetable or I mean, they mix the. So it can be vinegar or it can be acid produced by bacteria. So this is a pickled pickle. It's just a fermented pickled pickle versus cooking with vinegar.
And traditionally, pickles you buy in the store are vinegar based.
Yeah. Right. If it sits on a shelf, generally either it's been can pickled with vinegar added, or it has been pasteurized, and so all the good stuff has been killed. Which, why do that? They do have fermented sections in Whole Foods in particular, where they have little boutique ferment houses, and those are refrigerated, and they're fresh that way. And those vary in flavor too. We just got one. I can't remember what the brand was, but we just got one, and it was mostly salty cabbage.
It didn't taste very firm.
It wasn't super fermented, but it was also darn tasty. So it all depends on what you like and what you want to put it on.
And traditional pickles, you don't get the probiotics. And so, like, with all this fermented stuff, you're getting natural probiotics every time you eat it.
Super good for your intestinal health. Helps keep you regular.
So these are super crunchy.
Yeah,
That's all.
Is that
because they're not cooked. So
And
well, and
salt.
also red cabbage tends to
Yeah.
be
hold it? No.
really firm.
Mhm.
Yeah, so you may notice that it squeaks when you bite it.
Yeah.
That's just
Like
because
sauerkraut in my mind is not
it's mushy, right?
Yeah.
Because you probably had the cooked with vinegar kind,
probably.
which is why I recommend tasting this stuff in particular. This is the jam. It turned out really well. But yeah, or cauliflower. This guy, I added bay leaf, garlic, just a little bit of chili flake and some jalapeno, and just a touch spicy. But the cauliflower is still firm, and so you're able to eat it, crunch it on a salad with whatever. That's the super part about it. Like you still get the active fun of eating a vegetable. It just has more flavor.
Can I taste it?
Yeah, please.
So Steve, if someone, I have a lot of clients that ask me, can we have kimchi in phase one? What vegetables would you suggest for a kimchi recipe?
Okay, so for kimchi, great thing is there are hundreds of recipes of kimchi all over the place, and so you can just vary it to how you like it. You can use Napa cabbage, so definitely use Napa cabbage. You can also use green onion, and that's a standard staple. Those are two big things in there. Garlic, you can add. You can add chili paste as long as the chili paste doesn't have any sugar, added malt or anything like that, which there are tons of different kinds. I think even sriracha is just, just salt and red jalapenos, right?
It depends on what kind of sriracha.
Well, yeah, the basic one, but there are lots of ways to kind of do that, and that's just the most basic kind. Then you can add other things. You can add soy sauce or liquid aminos, rags. Are those phase one?
Mm-hmm.
You can add that. Salt, of course, or just make sure that your liquid aminos are tasty enough, whatever. And let's see, radish. Radish is so good. Daikon radish is amazing, and that's a standard one for kimchi. But you can add any kind of radish. Daikon radish can smell a little farty. But it's super good. It's super good for you. So I would recommend daikon radish as well. What do you think?
I think it's excellent.
Right there.
Is that cloves in there too?
I did not put cloves in this one.
It almost tastes like cloves or some sweet or like allspice or something.
It gets complex. Let's see what else I may have added.
Very good.
I didn't write it on there. I did add mustard seed and you know what? Fennel is probably what you taste like.
Really good. Spicy. Yeah, I love
Yeah.
spicy.
What's in the other one? It looks like zucchini.
This one?
Yeah.
This one? So
That looks interesting.
this is standard sauerkraut. And out of all these, it's my least favorite. It's just basic sauerkraut. But they like it too. And it is tasty. This one actually has kind of like a nutty smell to it. You never know what is going to come out of it, but it's safe. It's good to eat.
And that's what you just made today.
And that's what we just made today.
Yeah.
But your mileage may vary. You never know, like, exactly how it's going to turn out. That's the beauty of farming, I guess. Ranching, I suppose. So yeah, you can add whatever. I added cloves to these, maybe a little bit clovey. My tongue went a little bit numb when I tasted, but it does work. And it is just part of the standard pickling spice, which I use all the time. You can get McCormick and Schmick sells just a bottle of pickling spice. They don't have it at Whole Foods. You could probably get it at Safeway or a Lucky or Albertsons down here. Any kind of like regular supermarket, they probably have it there. And that just produces a generally well-balanced, well-flavored pickle. Or you can mix and match. You got these. Juniper berries are amazing. Coriander seeds, mustard seeds whole are just magic. But honestly, whatever you like. Dill, rosemary.
Turmeric in there?
I haven't put turmeric in there, but that's great. Like a whole
Yeah.
turmeric root. That's such a good idea. I haven't done that, but it would color. Turmeric's super anti-inflammatory too. Yeah,
You can get it at Indian stores, or maybe other places. Yeah.
that is a great idea. Yeah. Oh, and the other nice thing about fermenting is it doesn't break down the nutrients in here like cooking does. So you cook broccoli, you cook out not all the vitamins, but you cook out a lot of the nutrition value in there. These guys, not so much. So you're able to eat it, consume, and really feel good about what you're eating. You're eating healthy. You're eating phase 1, which is super duper. I'm on 2 weeks on phase 1 right now. And it's just, I think it's super flavorful. Thanks, guys, for joining. Yeah.
Mike, so once you get it to where you want it and you're happy with it, then does it go in the refrigerator?
Yes, then you toss it in the fridge. Thank you, I got derailed. You toss it in the fridge and it will last however long you want. If it starts to taste bad, throw it out. If it tastes bad from the beginning, throw it out. Again, it's cheap. So just don't feel bad because you will be giving to your garden.
How do you know it tastes bad? I mean, what is, what is tasting bad?
It's preference.
Okay.
Yeah.
You like your tomatoes.
Yeah.
What is it? Tomatoes? Have you ever fermented tomatoes?
So tomatoes can be fermented. They generally get mushy pretty
Yeah,
quickly,
yeah.
like other soft fruits. They can be. I have not fermented tomatoes though.
Seems like it'd be good to add the other things.
Yeah, like fermented cherry tomatoes. I have really thought about just doing a batch of that, add it to salads or whatever. Yeah.
Maybe fermented sun-dried tomatoes.
Sun-dried tomatoes are on their own. They're so good. But yeah, exactly. And they're already a little bit salty anyway. So
We throw it out when it got too mushy.
yeah, texturally, if you're not into the texture,
Yeah.
toss it. Again, it's not a huge loss, and your sink, your garbage disposal will love it. All those little bacteria in there eating all the stuff up. Like it's just not necessarily. I don't advocate throwing things out, but if you don't like it, the cost is so low, and the time investment, like the active time investment, is so low that don't worry about it. There are more times I've made bad ferments, and I've been like, oh, what have I done? And you just.
Do you ever add it to a green smoothie?
I haven't added it to a green smoothie because in the past, thank you for that, I thought of green smoothies as sweet. If you're thinking of a savory green smoothie, yeah, you could definitely add that.
Oh, that'd be good.
Probiotics for days.
Yeah. That would be very good.
Well, thank you, Steve.
You're welcome. Thanks, guys.
Thank
I appreciate it.
I always have to taste.
Yeah. Come taste. Yeah, feel free to come over, taste cauliflower. Any of the krauts.